Hey everybody, Sean from Media Assault here, and it's time once again for another entry into my countdown to Star Trek Into Darkness. And this is the second entry, and of course that means I'm going to be talking about the second Star Trek movie, Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan from 1982. And as I discussed with the introduction to the series, Star Trek: The Motion Picture, that film was a resounding critical failure, even though it did make money at the box office. So with a sort of begrudging okay, Paramount decided to make another entry into the series. But what they did do is they took Gene Roddenberry off the production team and made him more of an advisor than anything else, because they were pretty much blaming him for the initial film's failure to be a critical success. And so what they did was they came up with a script relatively quickly. Nicholas Meyer, the director, who also directed Time After Time, came up with a script and didn't receive credit for it, finalized from the ideas from some other people, and basically wrote it in 12 days, coming up with the final script. And the movie was made for 1982 amount of $11 million, which would translate to about $45 million today. So it was extremely cheap compared to the first movie, which cost in 1979 $46 million to make. And it was kept at that low budget by reusing a lot of effects and sets and stuff from the first film. And even though that was the case, this film has garnered probably the best, I would have to say it's probably the most critically successful film in the first 6 Star Trek films, and probably remains the favorite of fans as well. What it does is it does bring the original cast back once again, but instead of being the very serious tone of the original movie, the humor comes back. The characters are more like they were in the original series. The chemistry between the characters is more emphasized, and this time out we have an actual villain, Khan, who is actually from the original series. He was a villain from an episode called The Space Seed, and this is the first example of a TV series having a sequel done via motion picture, via the theater. So it's the first time a movie has ever been a sequel to a TV series, I guess is what I was trying to say. Also, the pacing in this film is a lot more fast-paced than the original film, where the original film was very concerned with making everything seem epic. It's very obvious in this film that things have been pared down quite a bit. The sets don't look as large. The effect shots aren't necessarily as slow. Anything that was sort of that slow panning and sweeping camera angles over the spaceships is replaced by spaceships that whip by the camera pretty quickly, but still emphasize the size and the difference that I talked about in my previous entry about how they wanted to emphasize the size of the ships for the big screen. Ricardo Montalban is the actor who plays Khan in this film, and if you're not familiar with the Space Seed episode, of which this is a sequel, I don't know the actual storyline of the TV episode, but in terms of how he gets there, but James Kirk basically exiles Khan and his followers to this planet called Ceti Alpha 5, and they never check up on him, and the planet was thought to be relatively inhabitable, and when in fact it turns out it's not. It's basically a barren planet, like a desert planet. And Khan is very upset about this and wants to take Kirk out. He's discovered by Chekhov and another captain played by Paul Winchell. Is it Paul Winchell? I can't remember the actor's name. That's sad. Anyway, but Ricardo Montalban reprises his role as Khan from the Space Seed episode, and he makes for an incredible villain. He's not just a villain, whereas the first film lacked a tangible villain. He is a fantastic villain. He's actually got motivation. He's got a real reason to be pissed off. And as such, you can actually empathize with him a little bit. You can buy into his anger and the way he feels and why he feels the way he feels. And it's very, very, very much in contrast to the rather nondescript alien presence, alien intelligence, machine intelligence, if you will, of the first film. Like I said, this movie is a lot less concerned with being epic and more concerned with being entertaining. It moves much like an action film would. The pacing is emphasizing the confrontation between Kirk and Khan. But there are some slight cons to the film as a result of its relatively rushed production. It was filmed over the course of 3 months. There's a lot of reusing of the special effects footage from the first film. Like I said, they reuse a lot of sets from the first film. I think something like 60% of the sets in this film are reused from the first one. And the sets do seem smaller and more confined. This looks more like a TV show that's been blown up to widescreen sizes instead of completely constructed for the widescreen, like the first one did. And there are quite a few noticeable gaffes, if you will. And when I rewatched this on Saturday, I did notice, along with my friends, a few things that kind of really inconsistent stuff, like dead people moving their eyes or their hands, a blood stain on Kirk's uniform that moves around, things like that. There was one particular scene where Kirk sits in a chair and you can see something is stuck to the bottom of his shoe. Just interesting stuff like that. That just gives you an idea that this film was kind of rushed, was done on the cheap. Like I said, it was done for $11 million. Ended up making over $100 million, so it was incredibly profitable. It basically reignited the fire of the franchise, and if it wasn't for this film being as successful and commercially and critically as it was, I think we would have seen the end of the Star Trek franchise. This would have been the last Star Trek film featuring the original cast. It's a lot more enjoyable than the first film. It's a film that I rewatch as often as I possibly can. If it's on cable, if I'm just flipping channels and it's on, I'll stop and watch it. I really enjoyed it. I had no problems enjoying it again. I don't know how many times I've seen it now. This is probably the 5th or 6th time that I've sat and watched it from beginning to end. Like I said, for the first one, that was the 2nd time I've watched it in 33 years. So there's an obvious difference in the amount of interest that I have in rewatching this particular film. I watched it with friends on Saturday. They enjoyed it too. Of course, it's very quotable. It's just a really good time, and it reminds you of why you liked the original series in the first place and why you like the characters, because I really think that that's the core of this film. It's not the special effects, which were such a major focal point for the first film, and it's not that it's Star Trek. It's that the characters of Captain Kirk, or Admiral Kirk as he is in this film, Captain Spock, and Dr. McCoy primarily are the reason you watch this film and like this series, the interplay between them, the chemistry between them, which was somewhat present in the first film, but it's all over the second film. And there's just a lot of humor that comes out of that, but a lot of nostalgic feelings that it brings from the original series, but also just an appreciation of what these characters mean to each other, and it's tangible in this film. So I would give Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan a 9 out of 10, before I gave the original Star Trek the Motion Picture a 7 out of 10, even though I didn't enjoy it anywhere near as much the first time. I did enjoy it a lot more the second time. So 7 out of 10 for the first one so far, 9 out of 10 for the second one, and I have a feeling it will be very tough to beat this particular movie in terms of my favorites as we go through this. But next week, stay tuned for my first viewing of Star Trek III: The Search for Spock. Since it was released, and I think it was in 1983 that came out, maybe 1984, I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's the first time since I saw it at the drive-in that I will be watching Star Trek III: The Search for Spock. So I'm very much looking forward to sitting through that one again and seeing what my feelings are. So Thanks for your patience for while I was a little bit sick and got this up a little bit late. So, as always, feel free to rate, comment, and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and take it easy.